The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom has been out for over 2 months now. It had only been a 4-year wait, but college and the pandemic made those 4 years feel a lot longer, especially because of the incessant waiting for this one title over the period of 4 years. After dumping hours upon hours into this game and finishing it, I now feel conflicted regarding it. While I enjoyed Breath of the Wild to some extent, the cons heavily outweighed the pros, and while at first I was ecstatic about Tears of the Kingdom, after taking my rose-colored glasses off and examining in detail, I realized that the game carries many of its predecessor's faults. Let me first preface this video by saying that I actually loved Tears of the Kingdom, and had a lot more fun with it than I did when I first played Breath of the Wild. And even after reading the Creating a Champion book, I've actually shifted a lot of my perspective on Breath of the Wild as well. But I feel both games carry similar struggles in its approach of telling their stories, though Tears of the Kingdom does do a better job. However, this video will solely be talking about Tears of the Kingdom, as a lot of how I feel about Breath of the Wild remains the same. I still think the gameplay falls short, but after taking a closer look at the story and characters, I realized just how brilliant they are. To begin this discussion, I will first discuss my critiques on the game before giving praise. Overall, the biggest issue I have with this game is that it feels much too similar to Breath of the Wild. I can already see the comments ranting about how this is a sequel and it's supposed to do that, but I disagree. Majora's Mask is a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, but feels nothing like it. In fact, Tears of the Kingdom basically is a literal direct copy of Breath of the Wild. Rather than a standalone sequel, it really does feel like Breath of the Wild Part 2 the remix. Like Breath of the Wild, there are only 4 temples, hundreds of shrines, 15 Sheikah towers, and 18 memories. This game is the same as Breath of the Wild, just with a green aesthetic rather than blue. While the temples in this game are well done, which I'll get to later, they're still rather short, and while the temples are enjoyable, several of them would have been better than hundreds of shrines again. And because of all of this, Tears of the Kingdom loses replay value exceedingly quickly, because it's the same Hyrule we've been exploring for the past 5 years. The same islands are scattered throughout the sky, only having 2 major islands, which are the Great Sky Island and Dragon Head Island, while the depths take Hyrule's map and invert it, and don't offer much besides the Yiga hideouts and Schema Stones. The only significant places in the depths are Gloom's Approach and Gloom's Origin, the Fire Temple, and the Spirit Temple. Since before the game's release, the fandom has debated if Tears of the Kingdom is DLC or not. But ultimately, it is. It's the same format from every angle, just with a different story. I wish it had just been released as a big DLC pack, because Tears of the Kingdom does not establish itself as its own entity. And pardon my language, but $70 for a game we already bought 5 years prior is fucking ridiculous. And before anyone asks how it could have been DLC in the comments, here's how. Scale it all down. In the sky, have only the Great Sky Island, and in the depths, the Fire Temple and Gloom's Approach. It could have consisted of constructing Lookout Landing, finding the Gloom, going to the depths and finding Ganondorf, Zelda going to the past, Link being brought to the sky, traversing the Great Sky Island, recovering the memories and finding the Light Dragon, doing the 4 temples, and fighting Ganondorf at Gloom's Origin. These are the aspects that make Tears of the Kingdom the game that it is, and it could have easily just been added into Breath of the Wild instead of us having wait for 5 years for Tears of the Kingdom. Speaking of which, the game was ready for release in 2022, but they had us wait an entire extra year when the game was finished for seemingly no reason, which is yet another thing that bothered me. The Zelda team is more than capable of releasing completely different titles in shorter periods. Wind Waker and Twilight Princess are completely different games in virtually every aspect, but were released only 3 years apart. Majora's Mask took only 12 months to develop, and while it utilized its predecessor's assets like Tears of the Kingdom does, it had more content. I'm not saying that the developers should work under such pressure all the time, I'm only saying I don't think we needed to wait for Tears of the Kingdom for as long as we did, considering it reused the physics engine, overworld, character models, and has the same dungeon, shrine, tower, and memory layout as Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild was specifically crafted to be an open-world, non-linear game, and everything it does is in accordance to that. Tears of the Kingdom was not, and it shows. It's simply another story pasted onto this Hyrule. Plot holes. There are 2 that are massive and I'm assuming were used to make the game feel independent from Breath of the Wild, but instead make it wildly confusing to comprehend what's going on. The first being that all the Sheikah tech from Breath of the Wild is just completely absent. So the 4 titans I freed the champion souls from, the shrines I spent hundreds of hours in, the towers that I had to climb, and the guardians that infested the entire kingdom are just gone. And nobody seems to care at all or know anything. I didn't literally expect the game to pick up where Breath of the Wild left off with Link and Zelda going to investigate why Vah Ruta was malfunctioning, but it could have given some sort of explanation. Maybe the Divine Beasts and the Guardians were unassembled and the shrines and towers were put back underground. It wouldn't be difficult to simply tell us what happened. Cass, one of the main characters from Breath of the Wild, is just gone without a trace. But his daughters are still there in Rito Village and don't seem to say anything. They could have explained where he went, and that would solve the plot hole. Even the Shrine of Resurrection in this game is just gone entirely, and the only thing that remains is a hot spring. And then we have the Imprisoning War. To give a surface level explanation, the Imprisoning War was first referenced in the prologue of A Link to the Past, and takes place on the branch of the timeline where Link is defeated at the end of Ocarina of Time. Because he, the chosen hero, was killed, the sages had no choice but to imprison Ganondorf on their own. However, in Tears of the Kingdom, this is inaccurate because there was never a Link in this timeline to begin with, and there actually wasn't a Zelda there either, not until she time traveled to the past at the beginning of the game. So it seems to be an entirely different Imprisoning War. A more simple critique is that I wish we understood Ganondorf's motives a little more, but this is nothing new. His motive has always really been that he's evil and has a lust for power. Which leads me to talk about Ganondorf a little more. I was, and am still so glad he's returned in this game. I really don't feel the series is complete without him, and I did miss his presence in Breath of the Wild. It's also the first time since 2006 that we have all 3 Triforce wielders back together, but what of the Triforce? In Breath of the Wild, Zelda seems to wield all of it, which in my theory is why she struggled so hard to use it, because she wasn't meant to have every piece. But even now with Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf all present, the Triforce isn't in the game. This title focuses on the Secret Stones, which like the Triforce came from the gods, but it was a wasted opportunity to not include the almighty relic that's supposed to be the most powerful thing in the universe. The Secret Stones only amplify the powers of their commanders, but the Triforce grants unlimited power, wisdom, and courage to their respective wielders. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom seek to reinvent the Zelda formula, but you can reinvent and innovate without taking core aspects of the series away, which is what is so frustrating about both of these titles. I personally wanted to know a lot more about the ancient sages and wish we could have. This is just a side note, but the Zora's voice is so heavenly. I loved listening to her say anything at any time.
King Rauru, we just received word that the last free village in the Gerudo Desert has fallen.
As the Sage of Water, I bore a secret stone and fought alongside my fellow sages in battle. Another of the 6 sages, the Sage of Time, came to visit me, and the destiny of the Zora was made crystal clear.
The ancient sages are essentially the champions of this game, but we know next to nothing about them. I think they could have at least had their own memory to show who they are underneath the masks. However, moving on to new abilities, in Breath of the Wild we had the champions' abilities, and in Tears of the Kingdom we gain new abilities from our friends in the modern day. However, these new sage abilities aren't as good as the champions' abilities from Breath of the Wild. In the first game, I was constantly using them all, but in Tears of the Kingdom, I only ever kept Tulins on and occasionally used Rejus. Moving on, Fuse made weapon durability less bad, and it was fun seeing the different weapons you can craft from monster parts, but yet again, the Master Sword is breakable. So Zelda went back in time to heal it for literal eons as a dragon, but it still breaks in 10 minutes. This seriously should have been the one unbreakable weapon in the game. It's just laughably ironic because of the emphasis on fixing the sword in the first place. And finally, I just have one question. Why can't you pet dogs? I'm so serious. This was something a good amount of people actually complained about. It's nothing huge, but that's why its absence is so absurd. During all these years of development, they couldn't have made a simple animation for petting a dog. Now, let's talk about what Tears of the Kingdom does right. To begin with, the game's opening is immaculate. I will go on record to say that this is 100% the best opening out of any Zelda game. The announcement trailer shown at E3 2019 was, and still is, so intriguing and mysterious, and these qualities are very much present in the game during the sequence. I'll talk about music soon, but the music that plays here is so good. I love the reverse chanting that's included in this game's score. It gives the player unease while also creating excitement. The music intensifies as Zelda and Link descend further and further below the castle, eventually discovering the corpse of Ganondorf. It's been 13 years since Ganondorf has been present in a Zelda game, his last appearance being Twilight Princess. And as I stated earlier, I really feel a big part of the series is missing when he isn't there. So you can say I was thrilled to see him return. Now let's talk about the music of the game in detail. While Breath of the Wild did have music, it was much more simplistic and toned down, which presented the post-apocalyptic Hyrule well, but it still felt more moderate. But Tears of the Kingdom soundtrack genuinely sounds like it could be the score of a movie. As previously mentioned, the prologue's theme is incredible and sets the tone for the opening sequence. But there are so many more that are so great, such as the theme that plays during the ascension to the Wind Temple, the Fire Temple theme, which sounds similar to Ocarina of Time's, Master Koga's theme, every piece of music in this game does an impeccable job at creating an atmosphere for the situations you're in. It's on par with the rest of the Zelda soundtracks. I think probably the biggest complaint from everyone regarding Breath of the Wild was the absence of traditional dungeons. I myself was heartbroken at their exclusion, but Tears of the Kingdom brings the traditional temples back. While they are indeed a little too short, they are all still enjoyable. Each temple in the game has some sort of significance to the tribes in each region. The Wind Temple is the Stormwind Ark, a ship from Rito Legend. The Fire Temple is the ancient city of Garandia, an abandoned city full of mining rails. The Water Temple is the Great Wellspring of Hyrule, a waterworks facility that is the direct source of Zora's Domain's water supply. And the Lightning Temple, a myth from Gerudo murals, seems to be the only actual temple used for some sort of worship. Each of these temples have their own elemental influences, music, and unique bosses. There is technically a fifth temple, the Spirit Temple, but it lies in the depths and only contains a boss fight. However, this is the only kind of dungeon in Zelda history to have you do the work for it outside of the actual temple. So while the Spirit Temple itself doesn't offer much content at all besides the boss, the process of completing it was a very unique experience. But ultimately, there are really only 4 temples to progress through in the traditional sense. Within these temples, you fight alongside each region's respective sage. It reminded me of working with the sages in Wind Waker to finish their respective temples. It makes the process feel a lot less lonely and more fun having a partner with you. To continue, a big issue I had with Breath of the Wild was that it felt incredibly empty and void of content. Hyrule was a world recovering from an apocalypse, and reflects that. While Breath of the Wild's overworld was dead, Tears of the Kingdom is very much alive. Hyrule feels so much more populated, and there are lots of places to interact with the residents of Hyrule. Lookout Landing, your base of operations, grows in population as you assist each region of the kingdom. Kakariko Village is full of researchers. Hateno Village is living through an election. Lurelin Village is being rebuilt after a pirate raid. The couple from Tari Town whose wedding you attended in Breath of the Wild had a daughter, and she is now embarking on her own for the first time. Link can work with the monster control crew to attack and eradicate monster strongholds. He can also travel to different stables to find the disbanded band members of the Stable Trotters, and then bring them all together again. These sequences are so much fun, and make the world seem real and alive. It shows that the people of Hyrule have grown tired of living in turmoil, and have taken things into their own hands, even when Zelda and Link are still considered missing. One of the biggest new features of this game is building vehicles with Zonai devices. This was definitely appealing and makes for a lot of fun, and makes traversing the overworld a lot easier. I've seen limitless creations of what people have done across social media, and I think this gives the game a classic Nintendo feel. I was heavily disappointed with Breath of the Wild's lack of enemy and boss variety. But Tears of the Kingdom makes up for this by assigning each temple a unique boss and added several new enemy varieties, such as Like-Likes, Aracudas, Horriblins, and Gloomhands, this game's equivalent to Breath of the Wild's Guardian. My favorite being the Gibdo. Once appearing as mummies, they are now insect-like creatures that can walk, crawl, and fly. The Lightning Temple's boss, the Gibdo Queen, is their leader, much like real-world insect colonies having a larger-sized queen. What made Breath of the Wild even worse was its final boss. The game had been failure after failure, and the final boss was an absolute joke. But the final boss and ending sequence of Tears of the Kingdom is honestly one of the best in the entire series. Once you get all the way down to Gloom's origin, the sages rush in behind you, and together you exterminate Ganondorf's army. Then, you go further in and find Ganondorf waiting for you. He rehydrates and the first phase begins. This fight is relatively difficult, but provides an exciting start as it is just Link and Ganondorf alone, in the deepest core of the earth. After defeating him, he activates his secret stone and transforms into the Demon King. This second phase giving him a comical amount of HP and increasing the difficulty further. The sages enter one by one to help as well, which provides not only a sense of support, but a sense of friendship and trust. These two boss fights provide a worthy difficulty. They are the true final obstacle of this game. But after defeating the Demon King, in his final attempt to stay in power, he swallows the secret stone and transforms into the Demon Dragon, grabbing Link in his mouth and pummeling through the layers of the earth to the surface and out of Hyrule Castle. An uncanny parallel to Calamity Ganon's encircling of the castle in Breath of the Wild. This entire segment feels like something out of a movie, something truly epic. This boss is simplistic like Dark Beast Ganon, but because Ganondorf in the depths poses such a difficulty, it is clear that this is meant to be the more cinematic finale. This is also the first time since Twilight Princess that Link and Zelda fight Ganon together. The adrenaline this fight gives you is something that few games can accomplish so well. Upon the Demon Dragon's defeat, Rauru and Sonia are able to return Zelda to her human form and heal Link's arm. The two then fall safely to the surface. The two reunite in a rather heartwarming way. Then, after the credits, they reunite with Purah and the sages and ascend to the Great Sky Island. Here, they say goodbye to Minoru, the sages pledge their allegiance to the Kingdom of Hyrule, and the story ends. This game's ending is not only incredible, but pulls on my heartstrings because it isn't only the ending to Tears of the Kingdom, it's also the ending to Breath of the Wild. For the past 9 years, this is what Zelda has been. These two games. So finally finishing their stories makes you reflect on just how long you spent with these characters. Pros and cons considered, Tears of the Kingdom is an amazing game, and a lot better than Breath of the Wild. It's a nice mix of the open world Zelda that Breath of the Wild introduced, and the traditions of the franchise that make Zelda what it is. But in the end, while Tears of the Kingdom is amazing, it blatantly reuses the same outline of Breath of the Wild and fails in trying to be an independent title, which makes my opinion on this game so conflicting. It truly could have been, and in my opinion should have been, DLC and made Breath of the Wild one massive Zelda story. To finish, I really just want to say I'm tired and want to feel something entirely new from Zelda for the first time in nearly a decade. I'm ready to leave this Hyrule behind. I want so badly for the next game to have a new story, new overworld, new art style, new characters, new mechanics, the whole 9 yards. But only time can tell what Zelda we will get next.